Hello and welcome into another episode of Locked on Wolves. Today on the show, we're previewing Wolves-Warriors on Wednesday night. Can the Timberwolves break their 5-game losing streak on the road against the league's best team? I also want to take a look at the Iowa Wolves. Leandro Bolmaro, McKinley Wright, the two-way player, and Isaiah Miller, a training camp invitee for the Timberwolves this year, all had huge games in a double overtime win for the Iowa Wolves on Monday night. And then I also want to look at power rankings, update where we're at now 3 weeks into the season. It's all coming up on the show here today. Welcome in. You are Locked on Wolves.
You are Locked on Timberwolves, your daily Minnesota Timberwolves podcast. Part of the Locked on Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Wolves podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Ben Beecken. I'm the host of Locked On Wolves. I'm also the co-editor of Dunking with Wolves, the Timberwolves site on the Fansided Network. Today's episode of Locked On Wolves is brought to you by McDonald's, proudly serving communities since 1965. McDonald's has always been more than just a place to get tasty, affordable food. It's an unofficial community center. A big thank you to our friends at McDonald's for always being there. I'm loving it. Happy Wednesday, everybody. Happy hump day and happy Timberwolves game day. The Timberwolves are in the Bay Area in California tonight to face the Golden State Warriors, the 9-1 Golden State Warriors. I want to spend a little bit of time today on the show previewing that matchup. And I also want to spend the first part of the show talking Iowa Wolves and a big double overtime win on Monday. Some key performances by some very familiar names, if you paid attention at all during Las Vegas Summer League, training camp, preseason. Some notable lines, individual stat lines coming out of that game. And then also a quick peek at the power rankings. We're now 3 weeks into the season. And what are the national folks saying about the Timberwolves? That's all upcoming on the show here today. A quick thank you for making Locked On Wolves your first listen each and every day. And remember, Locked On Wolves is free and available on all platforms. That includes YouTube, as well as all the audio platforms, Apple, Google, Spotify, and of course, the all-new Odyssey app. You can also follow on Twitter at Locked On T-Wolves and at Beecken with 2 B's, 2 E's, CKEN. All right, let's start the show today by talking Iowa Wolves. Hey, the Timberwolves are going to lose 5 straight. We might as well highlight the G League version, the minor league version of the Minnesota Timberwolves, the Iowa Wolves, who of course play in Des Moines. They've only played 2 games so far this season, both against the Sioux Falls Skyforce. I talked a little bit on Monday's show about the Saturday night game where Leandro Bolmaro had a near triple-double in his official G League debut. He'd played in their lone preseason game the week prior. But Saturday, the Iowa Wolves won. Bolmaro had, I think it was like 29, 8-8 or something. Had a big game. McKinley Wright played well. Isaiah Miller. Nathan Knight had a massive game on Saturday. Nathan Knight got called back up to the Timberwolves for the road trip, and so he didn't play on Monday night. But the Iowa Wolves took on the Sioux Falls Skyforce a second time on Monday, and then they actually don't play again for a week. It's a really weird schedule this year in the G League. They've got a couple different quirks in the schedule, things that trying out, mid-season tournament type stuff. So we'll keep an eye on it throughout the year. But at any rate, they played Saturday, they play Monday, they don't play again for a week. Monday night they play the Skyforce again. No Nathan Knight, he was called up to the Timberwolves, but the Wolves still had Balmaro and they still had McKinley Wright, who's the other two-way player in addition to Nathan Knight. McKinley Wright, to refresh your memory, is the undrafted rookie who's a Minneapolis area native. I believe he played at Brooklyn Center or Brooklyn. I think it was Brooklyn Park. Apologies to whichever school I guess to both those schools since I'm messing it up. But from the North Metro in the Twin Cities, was not recruited hard enough apparently by Richard Pitino, the former coach of the University of Minnesota Golden Gophers, went to Colorado. Played 4 years at the University of Colorado, was a fantastic defensive player, was a solid contributor to a team that made the NCAA tournament, I believe, a couple of times while he was there. Went undrafted, and the Timberwolves got him on a 2-way deal. And the book on him is he can run a team. He's a solid player on both ends of the floor. He's a really good defender. The only concern was his outside shot. He was like a 32-ish%, 33%, I think at best, 3-point shooter over his 4-year college career. And there was some concern if he could shoot the ball at the NBA level. He's got decent size for a point guard, but the thought process is basically worst case scenarios, he can be like a third string point guard type. So to have him on a 2-way contract is fantastic. But if there's any offense there beyond what we saw him do for the Colorado Buffaloes in college, then then he's an outstanding player on a 2-way contract. He looked good in preseason. He looked very good. in summer league, and he seemed to be the type of guy who could have a role moving forward. In my opinion, I think he's got a more diverse skill set than Jordan McLaughlin. Not quite apples to apples at this stage in their respective careers, but both were 4-year college guys, 4-year starters at Power 5 schools, um and undrafted. And McLaughlin had 1 year in the G League before he signed the two-way deal with the Wolves, but some similarities there. So it'll be intriguing to see McKinley Wright throughout the season, what he's able to do. And then also Balmaro, obviously the first round pick from last November, just over a year ago now. The 2020 first round pick. He was one of the 3 first rounders besides Jade McDaniels and of course Anthony Edwards for the Wolves. He stayed overseas last year for another season and then came over this year. He's appeared in a couple of games in garbage time for the Timberwolves, including just on Friday night. He played Saturday for the Iowa Wolves, had the near triple double, and then had another big game on Monday. And then for me, the other player that I think is most interesting is Isaiah Miller. If you're a regular listener to the show, you'll know I was excited about him in Summer League. I was excited that he was on the training camp roster. I think he is your prototypical third string point guard who can come in and give you energy minutes, be a hard, tough-nosed defender, and score in the paint. I mean, he can't really shoot the ball outside 15 feet with any accuracy, but he does basically everything else well. He's small, he's short, and he doesn't shoot the ball well from the perimeter or really from outside 15 feet. But he's a great rebounder for his size. He's a fantastic defender, and he can score in the paint with the best of them. He's very athletic. And the Iowa Wolves actually tweeted out a thread of his dunks from Saturday's game alone. He had like 4 big dunks, 3 big steals, and a really electric player to watch. So at any rate, without going blow by blow, I went back and I watched the Iowa Wolves game from Monday, and it was, kind of a back and forth game. And then they got down by 20 in the second half. They were actually down 20 in the fourth quarter, I should say, to the Sioux Falls Skyforce. And I mean, it was 18 points. I have it here, 18 points with like 3.5 minutes left or something like that. Yeah, 18 points with 4 minutes to play in the game. But then McKinley Wright comes down, makes a bucket, gets fouled, makes a couple of free throws. Isaiah Miller makes a basket. Balmaro has a beautiful assist to Isaiah Briscoe. They cut the lead to like 10 or 12 points at that point. Then Isaiah Miller scores another couple of baskets. It comes down to a back and forth. Again, 18 points with under 4 minutes to play. And the Wolves are within 1 after the Skyforce split a pair of free throws with under 10 seconds to play, got it up 2. McKinley Wright takes the ball the full length of the court on a full sprint dribble, basically hits a layup with just a couple seconds to play, sends the game to overtime. In overtime, the Iowa Wolves are down 4 with 10 seconds to play. McKinley Wright hits a tough 3-pointer to cut the deficit to 1. The Skyforce hit 2 free throws. Now it's a 3-point game again. Leandro Bolmaro, after a timeout, hits a really difficult double clutch 3. It was not a thing of beauty, but it went in to tie the game and send it to a double overtime. And then in double overtime, in a tie game, final seconds, McKinley Wright calls his own number in an isolation on the left wing, hits a really tough contested 3, is fouled on the play, hits a 4-point play, basically at the buzzer, half second left on the clock after the free throw to send them to the Iowa Wolves to a 4-point win. Fascinating. And McKinley Wright hit a shot in the closing minute, really closing seconds of regulation and both overtimes. Clutch play from Wright. He finished with 35 points. And again, I think he had 24 before that comeback late in the fourth. So he scored like 11 points in the final 4 minutes of regulation and 2-minute overtime periods. And he shot 14 of 23 from the floor, a really encouraging 4 of 7 outside the arc, played 41 minutes, had 5 rebounds, 5 assists, 2 steals, and 2 block shots. Leandro Bolmaro, another great game. He's going to get lost in the shuffle because of the clutch Wright performance, but he hit the big 3 that did tie the game at the end of the first overtime, had 25 points on 17 shots, was 7 of 17 shooting, 5 of 9 on threes, which again, outside shooting is a big thing for him. He's going to stick in a rotation role or eventually a starting role at the NBA level. He's going to have to be able to shoot the ball from the outside a little bit. And early indications are that's improved a lot, right? He shot over 40% from deep last year in Europe, after that being a major question mark prior to last year's draft. He got to the free throw line 5 times, made all his free throws. And also Balmaro had 6 assists, 0 turnovers in a team high 43 minutes. He had 7 turnovers in Saturday's game. So 7 on Saturday for Balmaro, 0 in a double overtime game, 43 minutes played for Balmaro himself, 0 turnovers to 6 assists on Monday, 5 rebounds, a steal, and a block. And then Isaiah Miller, 7 of 15 from the field off the bench, 14 points, 7 rebounds in only 24 minutes. He had 8 points in the final 4 minutes of regulation that helped get the Wolves to overtime. So keep an eye on Isaiah Miller. I think it's really unlikely, and frankly, hopefully he doesn't get a chance with the Timberwolves this year, because that would mean that there's injury issues to Russell, uh, uh, Patrick Beverly, and potentially even McKinley Wright. But Isaiah Miller deserves a shot at an NBA job here moving forward. He is a really intriguing player. Obviously with limitations. Again, I'll say that, but I think he's an NBA caliber talent, and he will appear in some NBA games, if not this year, certainly by next year. I think somebody's going to take notice and get him to an NBA roster. But impressive games for Balmaro and Wright. Very likely we're going to see them bounce back and forth throughout the season. They may stay down and practice with the Iowa Wolves now, with the Timberwolves on the West Coast for 3 games. They were back in the Twin Cities. I'm sure they would come back up to Minneapolis like they did during the long, 6 out of 7 at home for the Wolves to start the season. But don't expect those guys to shuttle back and forth to the West Coast, even without a game till next Monday. But we'll continue to keep an eye here at Locked On Wolves on the Iowa Wolves and what happens with their season. And of course, Balmaro, the two-way guys, Nathan Knight, I'm sure will go back down at some point, as well as McKinley Wright, Isaiah Miller. All those guys are players we'll keep an eye on throughout the season. Okay. Next, what I want to do is I want to jump right into the Wolves-Warriors matchup. I think that'll be an intriguing. Well, the Warriors are 9-1, so there's a lot to say about the Golden State Warriors. So I want to get into that here next, and then we'll close the show by talking power rankings here after the 3rd week of the NBA season. First, though, let's talk about our friends at Built Bar. I love Thanksgiving. All the good food and treats, and plenty of them. But maybe you want a yummy dessert that isn't so full of calories and sugar. It's the perfect time for Built Bars. Built Bar is the new holiday dessert. Feast on something delicious and feel good about it. One slice of pie has upwards of 300 calories, and that's on the low end. Most Built Bars are only 130 calories, just 4 grams of sugar, and have plenty of protein. Replace the coconut cream pie with coconut Built Bar, or go for a raspberry Built Bar instead of that raspberry pie. Lots of good flavors to replace any pie. Low calorie, low carb, low fat, high protein, covered in 100% real chocolate. Built is a great option for when you're hungry. If Thanksgiving isn't coming soon enough for you, go for a Built Bar or 2 now. Share some at your family gatherings. It'll make things less awkward. And perhaps Aunt Betty hasn't tried a Built Bar yet. New surprises all month long. Limited time flavors arriving at Built.com regularly. So check the site often. There's nothing like a Built Bar Black Friday. Mark your calendar. Black Friday will be a huge event with all sorts of surprises. Placed another Built Bar order this morning. I realized that the coconut brownie chunk had come out late last night. Or actually not that late. I just missed that it came out last night, which was a rookie mistake on my part. This morning, about to leave for work, realized I haven't ordered Built Bars. These are going to sell out. So I ordered them from my phone before I headed out the door. They shipped today. Can't wait to get them. I actually had another order arrive yesterday. I literally have at least 1 Built Bar a day. I promise you, they are delicious. They taste exactly like candy bars. You can go to Built.com, use the promo code LOCK15. You'll get 15% off your order. That's promo code LOCK15 for 15% off at Built.com. All right, let's talk about this Wolves-Warriors matchup. The Golden State Warriors are 9-1 so far this season. There's a lot to say about them. Steph Curry just dropped 50 in the win against the Atlanta Hawks. I think that was Monday night. Yeah, it was, because it was basically happened at the same time the Wolves were collapsing in Memphis on Monday. Or I guess later in the same night, I should say. Golden State, it's been weird. They played 3 of their first 4 games on the road to start the season and won all of those. And then now they're in game 7. This game against the Wolves on Wednesday is game 7 of an 8-game homestand for the Golden State Warriors. I can't, I realize the Timberwolves just played 6 out of 7 at home, but when was the last time the Timberwolves have had an 8-game homestand? I bet they've never had an 8-game homestand. And we've talked about this before in the past, that the Wolves typically travel more miles in the air than most other teams because they're in the middle of the country. So if you're on the West Coast, logic tells us that they're, if they go east, they're going to stay east for a while to make the travel worthwhile. So not going coast to coast, back and forth. So with the Wolves being in the middle, they have less long road trips, but they travel to each coast more often because they're in the middle of the country. And also there's no teams besides Chicago and Milwaukee, who are both, of course, in the Eastern Conference. They make 1 trip a year to each of those cities. Nobody else is close. Everybody else in the division, Denver, Portland, Oklahoma City, those teams are not, Utah, are not super close to the Twin Cities. So the Wolves travel a lot more than most teams. But anyway, 7 of 8 games at home, or excuse me, an 8-game homestand, 8 games in a row at home for Golden State. This is game 7. They have the Bulls on Friday night in an ESPN game. So perhaps the Wolves will get Golden State maybe a little bit comfortable looking ahead to the national game on Friday. The end to a long homestand. Maybe they'll be a little antsy. I don't know. That's the only angle I could think of with this. If it was the last game of the homestand, I'd actually feel a little bit better about it, honestly. But at any rate, Crazy. 8 consecutive home games. Their only loss so far this season was an overtime loss to the Memphis Grizzlies, who, of course, just beat the Wolves in overtime on Monday. Otherwise, and this is fascinating, the Warriors are 9-1. They've played 10 games. They have had 0 games besides the one they lost to Memphis that were decided by less than 3 possessions. Every other game was 7 points or more was the final differential. Now, obviously, without going through and looking at the exact, there could be some noise there at the end of the game, some garbage time, extra playing the foul game after they don't need to for opponents and stuff like that. But there's been no 2 possession final scores. No 1 possession final scores. All of these are 3 possessions or greater, besides the one game that they lost, which was in overtime. And of course that game was close. That was a 3-point game. So the only 1 possession game they played all year, they lost in overtime. And then everything else has been 3 possessions or greater. They have just beaten everybody to a pulp. They're number 1 in net rating. They're number 1 easily in point differential. I think they're like 13, like 13.7 plus 13.7 point differential. I don't think anybody else is above like an 8.5 league wide, not just Western Conference, league wide. The Golden State Warriors have just dominated. Of course, still no Klay Thompson, still no James Wiseman. And you look at this roster, yeah, I mean, it's deep, like it's a good roster, but they've got guys playing really well that haven't played major roles in NBA playoff teams very often. I mean, Gary Payton Gary Payton, he was on the Warriors briefly last year, but he does not have a track record of being a really successful backup NBA guard, and he's been fantastic. Now, short minutes. I mean, he's playing like he's a fringe rotation guy, 10, 12 minutes a game, averaging, 11 minutes a game. But he's been really good when he's on the floor. He's shooting 1 3 per game, and he's shooting 55.6% from deep. Obviously not sustainable. I get that he's playing short minutes. But when you're 9-1, stuff like that is going right. You're 10th guy in the rotation, and he is he's 11th in minutes per game on this team. I mean, obviously he's playing well, right? Nemanja Bjelica, a former Timberwolf who was stuck in Sacramento Kings purgatory after being in Timberwolves purgatory, briefly played for the Heat. Last year, late in the season, he was traded to Miami, and he's now playing a big role in a team that currently is the best team in the NBA. A big role. It's a bench role, but 15 minutes a game. He also is shooting well over 50% from 3, 57.9% shooting just under 3-point attempts per game. But Bjelica is fantastic. He's been having a great year. Otto Porter Jr. had been stuck languishing in Washington, had the injury issues after he was in Chicago. He's now one of the key bench players, 17 minutes a game for Golden State, and has played very well. I've always really liked him. Thought he had superstar potential, but the injuries sapped him of a lot of his effectiveness. He's been fantastic in more of a bit role, an ancillary role with the Warriors. I mean, Kevon Looney, he's obviously been there for a while, but he's playing the best ball of his career. Andre Iguodala is still just a monster off the bench for them at age 38. Draymond Green is looking a lot more like, I mean, I know he's 31 now. I know he's had a couple of so-so seasons. He looks a lot more like the Draymond Green of old. And of course, Steph Curry has just been arguably the best player in the league so far this year. Maybe not even arguably. 32% assist rate. He's still shooting 2/3 of his shot attempts are coming from outside the arc, and he's shooting 38.8% from deep, 13.4 3-point attempts per game. Literally 2/3 of his field goal attempts are 3-pointers. As a team, the Golden State Warriors are second in 3-point attempts per game. The Timberwolves are number 1. The difference there, the Timberwolves are number 26 in 3-point percentage. The Warriors are number 2, making 38% of their 3-point makes. They're also the best defensive rebounding team in the entire league. I mean, like they really don't have a weakness. I mean, what is it, right? I guess they're 21st in free throw attempts per game, but they still make their free throws when they get to the line. And if you're second in 3-point percentage and second in attempts from deep, then that doesn't really matter. If you're number 1 in defensive rebounding, that's going to help your defense. Oh, by the way, they're number 1 in defensive rating. They have the best defense in the entire league. Again, with no James Wiseman, again, with no Klay Thompson. I promise I didn't intentionally forget to mention Andrew Wiggins, by the way. But he's third on this team in scoring if you're looking at points per game, but he's still doing the Wiggins thing where he shoots 43% from the field, 33% from 3, plays solid defense most of the time. It kind of feels like he's the third option, but he's certainly not the third best player on this team. He plays his role well. He's obviously a better fit for them than he ever was in Minnesota. He's still, obviously, don't get me wrong, he's an NBA starting caliber player at this point. He's continued to improve getting away from Minnesota. And it's unfair for people to expect him, and I don't know that anybody does anymore, to live up to the number one pick hype. But he's a good player. I mean, he is. I don't think he fit in Minnesota any longer, and I do think there were expectations were too high, and then he didn't come close to living up to them in Minnesota. But he's fit the role that the Warriors have wanted him to fit. It'll be really fascinating to see what it looks like once Klay Thompson comes back, and if there's a chance that Wiggins gets traded this year by the deadline. I'm going to be really intrigued to find out how that all shakes out. But at any rate, this Warriors team does not really have any weaknesses. They're fantastic defensively. They're a fantastic rebounding team. They're a great outside shooting team. Overall, they're fifth in offensive rating, number one, of course, in net rating, as I mentioned, as well as in point differential. The only chance the Wolves really have in this game is that the Warriors are looking ahead to the Friday national game versus the Bulls, getting on the road. Maybe Andrew Wiggins tries to have a revenge game and gets really inefficient on us. Maybe Steph Curry has an off night, I guess is what you have to hope for. But this team has not had off nights this season. They have played fantastic all season long, all in the first 10 games of this year. So this is going to be a rough one for the Wolves. I haven't looked at the line, but I'm guessing that they're probably at least 8-point underdogs, 9-point underdogs in this game, which is a massive line. Especially for a team that 2 weeks ago was sitting at 3-1 and had just beaten the defending champs. But such is life in the NBA. So this is going to be a tough matchup. There's no two ways about it. Minnesota's got to do their best to try and make players. I say this all the time, but try and make players other than the Warriors' best player beat them. If they can make Andrew Wiggins beat them, great. They can force Draymond Green to shoot the ball, great. If you can make Jordan Poole beat you, fine. I mean, hat tip to Jordan Poole. He's their second best scorer. He's actually been fairly efficient this year, but you'd rather have Jordan Poole beat you than Steph Curry. Steph's going to get his, but you can force Jordan Poole into difficult shots that he's much less likely to make than Steph Curry. And so that'll be the goal. I think we'll see a lot of Josh Okogie on the Warriors perimeter players. He hasn't played as much recently. He's had a couple of DNP CDs. We'll see a lot of Josh. I think we'll see a lot of Jaden McDaniels on the perimeter. Maybe a little less Jared Vanderbilt. The Wolves are a good offensive rebounding team. The Warriors are a great defensive rebounding team. The Warriors don't really offensive rebound. They focus on getting back and transition defensively. So defensive rebounding may not be as big of a deal for the Wolves in this one. I guess the flip side of it is they shoot a lot of threes, so you may get some longer rebounds. Steph Curry likes to sneak in and grab those long offensive rebounds. I think we may see more McDaniels and Okogie than we do Vanderbilt in this game. And I also don't know that the Wolves are going to get away with the two big man front court with both Naz Reid and Karl-Anthony Towns in this game. As much as I've clamored to see more and more of that this season, and I think it's a great pairing, I don't know that the Warriors matchup is where it's at if we want to see those guys play more minutes together. All right. We'll, of course, have a post-game podcast following the show or following the game, I should say, Wednesday night. It'll be late. It'll post early Thursday Central Time, but we are going to do a post-game pod Wednesday night. Show's not over yet today, though. I still want to hit on Wolves power rankings, or I should say NBA power rankings, where the Wolves sit in those national power rankings here in just a moment. First, though, let's talk about our friends over at betonline.ag. We're back and we're better than ever. A new web interface for the start of the basketball season. More props, odds, and lines than ever before. BetOnline remains your number one spot for all the basketball and football action this season. Head to the new updated desktop or mobile website to sign up today and receive your 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit. Just use the promo code LOCKEDON to receive your bonus. From football to basketball, baseball, postseason, which of course now just ended, to NHL, boxing, and UFC, right on down to your favorite Vegas casino games. Don't wait to take advantage of all the amazing offers available for the 2021 season. BetOnline is the fastest and easiest way to bet all your favorite sports. Again, that's promo code LOCKEDON to receive your 50% welcome bonus on your very first deposit. BetOnline, where the game starts. All right, let's close the show today by talking power rankings. So, 2 weeks ago, coming off the first week of the season, the Wolves were, kind of middle of the pack. They were, I think, as high as 13 in a couple of power rankings, but mostly like in the 16 to 18 range. Last week, they were kind of dropped to the 21 to 23 range, and it felt about right. It felt about fair. This week, there's a consensus. Your Minnesota Timberwolves have plummeted, I think I would say, to the 23 to 25 range. In fact, most places had the Wolves at 25. Sporting News had the Timberwolves all the way up at number 23. Noted Karl-Anthony Towns is threatening a 50-40-90 campaign. Great. That would obviously be amazing if that could happen. We're also 10 games into the season, or I guess In the Wolves case, at the time this was written, this was Sunday power rankings, so before Monday's loss. This would have been 8 games into the season for the Wolves. But obviously 50, 40, 90 season, notable. It just feels kind of I don't know. I don't know that anybody really wants to talk about that right now. But for what it's worth, after 9 games, he is at over 50% from the field, 46.7% on 3. So he's obviously got the 50 and 40. And then the 90, he's at 85.7% from the free throw line, 36 of 42. That's probably going to be the tough one. I mean, he's been over 50% previously in his career from the field. In fact, every season, I believe, except for last year, he's well, actually, let me just, every year except for every year except for last year, he's been over 50% from the field. And each of the last 2 seasons, or I should say the 3 seasons before last year, he was above 40 from 3. So the 50-40 something he's done. It's the 90% free throw mark. He's 84% for his career. So that's going to be difficult. But at any rate, that's sporting news. They've got the Wolves all the way up at 23. The only other publication that had the Timberwolves higher than 25 is ESPN, which typically had been ranking the Wolves lower than everyone else. Shocker. ESPN has the Wolves at 24. And the quote that they had in there, and remember, ESPN is the one that uses a panel of 7 expert analysts who all vote, and then they compile them, and those are the rankings. The Wolves are at 24. And the I don't know who wrote the blurb about the Wolves, but it says that the losing streak has sapped the swagger out of a squad that started 3-1, which I thought was a great way of saying it. I mean, that's accurate, right? I mean, there's no swagger left in this Timberwolves team at all. They've had the swagger beat out of them already in just 9 games. And then Sports Illustrated, Zach Harper of The Athletic, and John Schumann of NBA.com all have the Timberwolves at number 25. Sports Illustrated wrote about the Timberwolves. I'll read this quote directly. The good Wolves. We hardly knew ya. It's the exact quote. That's true. 3-1. And that was it. What was last year? 2-0. And then the Towns injury happened and it was all over. This year it was 3-1. There's really no end in sight at this point. Zach Harper touches on the hashtag free cat liked tweet that I only briefly mentioned on last week's, I think it was the Thursday show, or maybe it was Friday, because that whole thing happened between the 2 Clippers games. And then John Schumann actually had a couple interesting notes. I've said this before almost every week. I think I'll remind everybody of this. But NBA.com's power rankings are the best, the most comprehensive. They've got the most statistics. They're the most thoughtful. And John Schumann noted that the Timberwolves have actually been the second best first half team of any team in basketball. They have the second best net rating in the first half of any team in the NBA, which is maybe not surprising if you watch them play every night, but it's still a bit, I don't know, disconcerting that they've been the second best team in the league for the first half, and yet they're sitting at 3-6 with a 5-game losing streak. Shows you how bad they've been in the second half. Now, of course, against Memphis on Monday, they were great in the third quarter. That was their best quarter of the game. And then the fourth quarter was awful and overtime wasn't much better. And they ultimately lose. But still, I guess if there's a positive takeaway, if we want to hang our hat on anything, I guess it's how great they've been in the first half of games so far this season. So there's that. And then also he notes, if you want to feel, I guess this could have fit last segment, but if you want to feel even worse about Wednesday's game, the Timberwolves face Golden State on Wednesday. Golden State has been the best team in the second half of games so far this season by far. So the league's worst second half team and the best second half team play on Wednesday. So if the Wolves are up 5 or down 3 at halftime on Wednesday, I guess, I mean, hopefully you didn't listen all the way through the show for good news here, because then I guess I'm about to tell you, don't feel too great about that. If it's a close game at halftime, league's worst second half team in the Timberwolves and best second half team in the Warriors. I think we got to wait till the final horn before we feel good about any Timberwolves lead in Wolves Warriors on Wednesday. But at any rate, we will have a post-game pod following the game. Even if it does go, it will go very late. It's a 9 p.m. Central tip. We will have the post-game pod up shortly after the game. Be sure that you're following and subscribed to make sure that you hear that. And thank you for making Locked On Wolves your first listen each and every day. Remember, Locked On Wolves is free and available on all platforms, including YouTube. And if you don't want to look at my face while I tell you about the Timberwolves, you can listen on any platform, Apple, Google, Spotify, and of course, the all-new Odyssey app. You can also follow on Twitter at Locked On T-Wolves and at Beecken. That's my account with 2 B's, 2 E's, CKEN. That's all we have for you today. One last reminder that the Locked On Wolves podcast is, of course, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Remember, the Locked On Network is your local experts on all the biggest stories. Also, a quick reminder about fantasy basketball. Our friend Josh Lloyd does a great job over there. You can make your second listen Locked On Fantasy Basketball. Josh Lloyd hosts the #1 daily fantasy basketball show on the planet. It also is free and available on all platforms. All right, that's all we have for you today. Once again, I'm Ben Beecken. This is the Locked On Wolves podcast, and we'll catch you next time.